Hello, everyone, and welcome to TechBeat, where leaders learn, innovate, and grow. I am your host, Earl Foote, founder and CEO of Nexus IT. Super happy to be with you here on this beautiful day, and glad to have you joining us. Today, I'll be joined by my friend and esteemed guest, Tim Cooley. I think you're really going to like Tim. I'll come back around to introducing him here shortly. Before we do that, just want to quickly make a few announcements. Thank you to Mallory Lovestad, our Director of Marketing, who is here in studio with me today. TechBeat is now on all major podcast platforms, so we would love and appreciate your subscription and hope that you find significant value in consuming the content and the stories of the founders and the leaders that I invite on TechBeat to share their subject matter expertise and all the lessons they've learned over their careers. I encourage you to listen or view the content wherever you see fit. We are now available anywhere you would like to tune in. Do want to mention that we will have questions and answers throughout the hour as applicable or towards the end of the hour. So feel free to post those questions and or comments in whatever platform you're joining us from. I also want to mention some of the upcoming episodes or segments that I have coming up with some really cool founders and leaders over the next few months. Here in March, we also have Dustin Kenyon and Rob Pilecki, co-founders of Washi, coming on TechBeat. Romain Marshall, he's one of the nation's foremost cyber and privacy attorneys. He's on with us in April, along with Jason Klug, another friend of mine and founder of Klugonics. Jeff Erickson, actually a good friend of Tim and I, and a business partner with Tim, will be on with me in May, talking about his journey as an angel investor and all the different fun things that he's done. Monte Deer, the CEO of Kizik, a cool shoe brand, based here in Utah, will be on with me in June. Johnny Hanna, former co-founder and CEO of Homey, will be on. Derek Miner and Greg Trimble from Lemonade Stand, and Andrea Guthrie, who is the chief strategy officer at Kiln, as well as the chairperson of the board at Pando, where we serve on that board together. So keep your sights out for announcements on those segments coming, and join us for those live streams, as well as consuming those episodes, on any major podcast platform. You can go, take a look at all the past episodes that we've had. Check it out on Apple, on Spotify, Google, Pandora, wherever you would like to. All right, let me bring up my esteemed guest of the hour, Mr. Tim Cooley. Tim is the author of the #1 best-selling book on raising capital, the Pitch Deck book, How to Present Your Business and Secure Investors. He is creator of pitchus.io podcast and consultant at PointB. Tim is the former executive director of Park City Angels. He has worked with Fortune 500 companies, as well as hundreds of early stage companies in marketing, product development, fundraising, sales, and operations. Tim, welcome to TechBeat, my friend.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Earl.
Yeah, it's cool to have you on, man.
Absolutely.
We've missed you here in Utah. You've been hanging out in New York for a little bit.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been good to get to know the city and just, explore. I've never been to New York before I moved out here, so it was nice to check it out. So like one of those bucket lists, just move to.
Yeah. We were talking before, going live here, and you're having quite the adventure out there. Lots of entertainment and nightlife type of opportunities out there.
Yep. I'm checking off all the buckets. So if someone wants to give me their bucket list, I'll add it to the list.
That's perfect, man. That's perfect. I'm a bit envious. New York is a fascinating place to be for a while.
Cool. Yep.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Let's dig into Tim Cooley, the guy that you are now and how you got there. And I know that starts way back, right?
Yeah.
So let's tell the audience a little bit about where you grew up, how you grew up, how you ended up, going through school, and then in this career that kind of led you into the startup realm and really understanding ultimately, raising capital.
Yeah, absolutely. So like many people, where I'm at is not where I started. I was actually born in Pittsburgh. and moved right away to Texas. So I lived the beginning part of my life in Texas, then moved again. My mom is a physician and graduated medical school when I was 11. So I got to be part of her experience going through school. We moved back to Pittsburgh for her residency, then ended up in Oregon. Her family's from there. My dad's family is from Pittsburgh. And so I never really felt like we ended up in Eugene, Oregon. Never felt like I really belonged there. And I tried to play baseball. That's really what I wanted to do. Didn't really work out like that. And I met a recruiter at the end of baseball practice at the local community college. And he was like, "Hey, would you ever join the military?" Or he said, "Why haven't you?" And I was like, "Nobody ever called me." He's like, "So if I call you, you'll go?" And I was like, "Yeah, well, I guess we'll at least have a conversation." So he called me and I joined the Marine Corps. I shipped out like 3 months later. And so I joined the Marine Corps, did that for about 5 years. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I ended up being a jet engine mechanic and building C-130s. And just never turned a wrench a day in my life, barely could change a tire, and became, quality assurance and really good at what that was. So I got out of fixing engines and had no idea what I wanted to do. I was an athlete. My mom was a doctor. So it kind of made sense to bridge those two worlds. And I ended up becoming an athletic trainer. Had a cool career there. I got to work at the University of Arizona. I got to do an internship with the San Francisco 49ers. And then I took a master's degree program in sports medicine at the University of Utah. And that's what brought me to Utah. So I was about, I don't know, let's say like a month into my program, and I just realized it was not the career that I wanted. Sometimes like I loved building things, and I kept walking by the engineering building and I was like, man, I should be in that building. Like that's what I should have done. But I had to finish the program. It was a scholarship thing. So I ended up getting my master's degree in sports medicine. But during that time, I read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, if you're familiar with that book.
Yeah, Robert Kiyosaki.
Yep. And and the whole book was about solving problems. And everywhere I went, I kept fixing these problems that I noticed. When I was in the Marine Corps, I completely introduced lean methodology. I didn't know that was a word. And we increased the output of our engines by 1,000,000. We were so efficient at it. And then I moved to, University of Arizona, and I put some processes in there that would help the students do their jobs better. And I did the same thing with the 49ers. And so when I finished reading that book, I was like, why don't I just fix something in my life, like that I can fix? And I had two concepts at the time. One was I was big into meal planning. And so I was like, what if I could just push a button and meal plan for me? And I was like, and then the other one was like, I was doing P90X, if you've ever done that. Great program.
Yeah, back in the day.
And I was like, but I hate the videos. Like I want new content, and I want it to keep drawing me back, right? Like gamification wasn't really a word back in 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. Right. And so I was like, what if I could kind of bridge this world of gamification? I built a board game, like I did all these like things. And so I started doing that. And that was my first foray into this world of entrepreneurship that I knew nothing about. So I spent the next year and a half, like kind of developing this idea, mocking up things. And then I got a job in marketing. I worked at a company called ClearLink in Utah. In early days of SEO. So I got to learn all of that. I moved to another company in SEO, and like SEO at that time was like the wild, wild west of online marketing. And so I had a great career in there, and I kept fixing these processes for all these companies. And I was like, man, I'm good at this, and no one listens to me. So I got into this entrepreneurship program with actually one of people that we all know, Robert Bell. And I was like, Robert's so smart. I need to be smart like him. And so he was in the MBA program at the University of Utah. And so I was like, maybe I need to go get an MBA so I can learn this whole business world, because I knew absolutely nothing. So I went to the U, and I got my whole mission was just to start a company. That's all I wanted to do. And so Cooley Fitness was this exercise and wellness company that I was doing. And I would say it was kind of working, but technology, I could spin that company up in a weekend now, whereas that one needed so much stuff. And so anyway, moving forward, I joined this capital raise group called Get Seated. It was a grant fund. So it was for students, and they could get $500 to $10,000 of grant money to hit milestones with their business, right? So like, oh, I want to build a landing page. I need $500, and then they would get it and do something with it. And so that got me involved in the Lasan Entrepreneur Institute at the University of Utah. I ran this program, and I got to meet hundreds of student entrepreneurs, and then they'd pitch us their ideas, and I'd give them money. And so like I'm on the money side, right? Like I'm writing the rules on how people can get funding, and I'm pitching them this health and wellness idea, right? To get my own money. And like I kept getting turned down, right? I'm like getting turned down by my own money. Like it was the most frustrating thing. Like imagine if you're like, Tim, can I have money? And then I'd be like, no. And so it was so frustrating. And then my friends would show up, not part of anything, pitch their idea and get whatever money they needed. And I'm like, what are they thinking that I'm not doing? So I spent 2 years in that ecosystem. I basically pivoted the company from what it was to a health and wellness blog, which was relatively successful, and I ended up selling a couple years later. But in the middle of that, I started a new company, which was a mobile gaming company, again, focused on health. That was something I was super interested in, called Random Breakfast. Super underfunded, but at the time, lean business development was really, really huge in Utah, especially, right? Lean model canvas and all that stuff. And so we're like, look, we're going to build a prototype, and then we'll take that prototype and then go get funding. Okay. So just like most people do, that's what makes sense. That's what you're told. So we had $35,000 and a team of 5, and I graduated my MBA program. And so we went full into this thing, just completely underfunded, right? We got 5 video games out really to test the market. And we thought that if we had something that people would see the vision. And so I went out to raise capital, right? That's what we teach people to do. And everybody said no. And the only thing I wanted was feedback. I was like, what am I doing wrong that nobody sees what we're doing? And I wrote the pitch deck book. So prefacing this, the deck that I use is in that book, right? It's so bad, but at the time I had no idea, right? And nobody was giving me feedback to fix it.
Yeah.
So we shut that down, and I got the great opportunity to run the Mill, which is a business accelerator out of Salt Lake Community College, where I got to work with, I don't know, a couple hundred entrepreneurs from lawn mowing companies to medical devices, and everything in between. And got to work with them on every aspect of the business, including fundraising. And I took that job for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to learn more about business because I really loved it. And I also really wanted to network. And I think that's where we met, Earl, was through that process. And so I did that. And then in the middle of that, I got the opportunity to be the executive director for Park City Angels. And so I got to be on the other side of fundraising. So I got to try it myself, which didn't work out. Then I got to help people do it. And then I got to see the investors saying yes and no and why. And I got to, again, going back to my buddies, what were you doing? So coming back full circle, I was like, I wish people would have given me feedback. So I started giving people feedback. I was like, look, I'm going to tell you exactly what you did wrong, what the investor said. And I took notes of hundreds of entrepreneurs, just listening and listening and listening. And to help my people at the Mill, I put together this PowerPoint presentation. And a good friend of mine, I'm sure you know him as well, Andy Jorgensen, was in the audience. He's an angel investor in Utah. And he was like, Tim, you have to turn this content into something because people just don't know what they're doing. And so I was like, really? Is it that good? He's like, it's just so easy to follow. So I did that. And that's where the book really, that's why it got developed. And then I went out and started helping people raise capital, from a full-time job perspective. And so I got to be literally on all 3 sides of the coin. And I really enjoy helping people, communicate what they're up to. And then more recently, I took a consulting role to get that corporate experience. I've been in the startup ecosystem for, 15 years. And I was like, why don't I get I know how to do that. I can get a company from 0 to 10 people, pretty well. But I was like, what does 500 or 1,000 people or more company look like? So I wanted that experience as well. So kind of switched roles a little bit.
Yeah, very cool. Which, by the way, now a lot of, and I think you know this because we've chatted about this before, but a lot of founders seem to come to me for advice on how to raise capital. Maybe it's because I'm accessible, and then here I am 25 years into bootstrapping, my own organization, and a few other side ventures I've done have all been bootstrapped. I know a lot about raising capital because I've been around the ecosystem. I've helped friends do it. I've been connected to investors. I've invested in some things, right? So I've been around it, and a lot of people seem to come my way. So my process now is, number one, go read the pitch deck book by Tim Cooley.
Thanks.
Number two, get on pitchus.io with Tim Cooley and Jeff Erickson. Get their feedback on your pitch deck. Number three, go to venturecapital.org now, connect capital, right? And go through the cohort, right? Get ready, get yourself, pruned and ready to actually have, a real startup. Go through that whole mentorship of, connect capital, and potentially through that process land capital. If not, you're ready to take your pitch deck, somewhere, and your product or your service, take it and actually try to land capital outside, right? But I think last I heard, Tara Spalding was on here with me a couple, like maybe a month ago. Mm-hmm. I think, 70% of the startups coming out of Connect Capital, out of what was venturecapital.org, land funding out of, their investor network, right? Yeah. Okay. So you become, through this journey of the last 15 years, you become the pitch deck guy. You become the guy who, one, knows how to look at and solve processes and solve problems, right? Which helps find product market fit. But then, the guy who, has been intimately close to raising capital for a long time and knows, how you should present your organization in order to attract investors. And so we didn't talk about pitchus.io. So let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah. So pitchus.io is an awesome thing. So y'all are unfamiliar with Volley. Volley is kind of like a asynchronous communication tool. And I would say about a year ago, maybe, there was a group of about 15 of us in this chat group, Earl, Jeff, and a bunch of others. And we were all getting these people like, hey, can you help me? Can you help me? And I think, Earl, you were like, what can we do to get a bunch of people the most help possible, right? Like, should we bring them into a room? And we did that, and it was awesome, right? We did a little party get together. Yep. And I was like, what if we could take it bigger than that? Like, what if we could get more eyeballs on the same things that we're telling people, right? So Shark Tank's out there, but Shark Tank's kind of like the polished version, super polished version of a commercial, right? And it's not really a pitch. It's not what most people go through. Yeah. And so I reached out to, I think you, and I reached out to Jeff, and I was like, hey, Jeff, I know you've got Forecaster going on. Would it make sense for us to try and just help people and then, see what's going on? And he was all for it. And so the two of us kind of started this little thing. And we invite people up, they pitch us, which is where the name came from. And then we give feedback, and it's very raw. We bring investors. Earl, you were one of our guests on it a while back. And we really just help. And I think that was really in genesis from what you mentioned about a year ago, I guess.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's been really cool to watch, what you and Jeff are doing with Pitchus. It's been cool to see, founders have the opportunity, because it can be brutal to stand up that first time, even if it's at 1MC, right? If it's with Rob Bell, right? Yep. It can be brutal to stand up that first time, having no idea what your pitch deck is really supposed to look like, and to give a really poor pitch, right? It's awkward for you. It's awkward for the audience, or investors, particularly if you're in front of investors the very first time. And so, first of all, kudos for the book. Kudos for being number one bestseller on the book on raising capital, and pitching. Second, on creating a platform where founders can they can go and get, feedback from seasoned professionals who have been around the ecosystem, who can give them constructive ideas around how they can improve their pitch so that they can go land some money with it. Right. That's cool, man. I'm always inspired by the things that you're up to, and the way that you're looking to help, the ecosystem around you. So let's talk a little bit about fundraising, Tim. Yeah. Fundraising today is not what fundraising was 12 months ago or 18 months ago. There's been a massive shift in the market right now. So I'm interested to know kind of what you're seeing, and you may even have a little bit more of a front row seat there in New York, right? Where, of course, a lot of the big venture capital firms are at, and where a lot of movement in capital happens. What are you seeing happen? What's different? What's changed?
So here's the thing a couple big things have changed. The expectations from investors are much higher than they've ever been from the companies themselves. That is largely due to education. So you had the lean startup movement that happened, probably about 10 years ago. I would say it really got started, really boiled up maybe about 5 years later. And then that's now the standard of communication through all of venture, I would say. You have this kind of U mentality where the coasts still really do have a lot of the money, still are willing to take bigger bets or like bets on big ideas. So the capital is there, but the middle of the country, right, and it's very much a laggard, and so they're looking for indicators that you're a real business, whereas the coasts are more about buying market share, right? So if we can build a business fast enough and big enough, we're going to get market share in this thing, this new idea, this new concept, versus the middle of the country tends to be, can you sell it? Is there a real market for it? And then, maybe acquire or grow later or exit, right? So that's really established now. I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. And there's a lot more capital in the middle of the country now too. People trying to be more involved in angel investing. So the big problem though with that is people want to be angel investors. I have a couple investments as well. And the amount of capital when we were starting out, right, back 20 some years ago, and when I went from my venture 10 plus years ago, $50,000 back then went extremely far. Like as far as like housing and just actually quality of care, that's not the same. You can build products for a lot cheaper now, but the needs of the community are much bigger, right? Like you need more functioning feature sets, whereas back then you only needed a couple and it would be better than what was out there. So you've got to build more.
Your MVP has had to evolve significantly.
Yeah, it's a significant growth on the MVP side. Yeah. But there's tools, right? Bubble.io. I am a huge fan. Not even from an MVP, but it scales. Like it's a great place to start and grow a business from. And I think people don't spend the time there. They want to go and learn and code, which is fine. So anyways, so the MVP requires more. It requires more of a team, right? So now you really need marketing. Like you mentioned for your show, you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, you're on all the podcasts, right? Like unless a software is doing that for you, that's a full-time position, right? It takes a lot of effort to do bootstrap, right? Because there's so many more marketing channels today than there's ever been. So that's a problem. You need more money. And so the third thing that's happening is valuation. So you need to build a bigger product. You need a bigger team. Therefore, you need more money, right? People need quality of care. $250,000 is like two people in a team, right? Whereas back, 5 years ago, you could have built a whole team of 5 maybe on that same dollar amount, especially in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
So you're seeing that happen. And then valuations are just ridiculous right now. People think that their companies are worth more than they are. And I'm not saying they are or aren't. That's just a magic number right there. But like you're seeing investors bail because just a number is thrown out there with no basis. There's no way of proving that early stage valuation anyway. Yeah. And so you're kind of seeing this really weird thing with entrepreneurs where you have no money, you're raising $1 million, and you're like, yeah, but I'm at a $20 million valuation. And you're like, how? I don't understand that. And then you're like, well, I'd go down to 4. And then you're like, yeah, well, I'm already done. I don't want to talk to you anymore. And so you kind of have this really weird thing happening right now. And so you've got that happening. And then entrepreneurs need to just raise more capital, right? We're seeing a huge shift now where, like I've seen this, and you've seen this as well, probably, where, yeah, you get your 250 or 500K your first round. That I would call it like a post-seed round is about 5 million. And the companies who need that money aren't getting it. They're just not getting the sustained capital. Like, they've proven product market fit, they prove they can sell, but now they need some kind of early growth money. They still haven't really figured out how to sell the product, and they're just not getting it. And in Utah, especially, again, I use the middle of the country, Utah's a very similar place to this, where they're like, well, you're only at $10,000 a month in revenue. Why do you need 5 million? And that fits more the coasts, right? From a growth perspective. But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very interesting, man. Of course, here in Utah, 3 years ago into maybe 12 or so months ago, we started to see a lot of, SaaS plays that were exiting at valuations of, 20, 25x revenue, right? Like, pretty astronomical. But here's the crazy thing. I actually know somebody in the last 6 months with very little revenue that exited at 146x revenue on a SaaS play, right? A Web3 SaaS play. That's, astronomically high, right? Insane. But if people are willing to pay for it, then it's worth that, right? At least for a time being.
For that person, it was.
What's that?
For that person, it was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. What I'm seeing, particularly, probably the middle America sort of scenario, Tim, is that investors, investment funds, VC and PE funds, and their LPs have been beat up pretty hard in the past decade on those valuations. They've been beat up on returns, right? They haven't really produced a lot of the results that they wanted to, the outcomes that they wanted to. And so I see them all tightening down, right? Everybody was pretty fast and frivolous with money, right? And like, cool, we got a good idea, we got a good play, it's a nice founding team, they seem to know what they're doing, bam, here's a whole bunch of money, right? And then you got all these businesses just burning massive amounts of cash, right? And trying to capture market share. But, like you said, a company doing 10,000, MRR, and, landing 5 million in funding, that's pretty crazy. Like, if you're at 10,000 MRR, you need to be able, you need to figure out how to get to 500,000, with a lot less money than $5 million, right? In my opinion. So what I see happening is that, funds and savvy angels, and of course LPs that are investing in funds, they all want to continue to see high growth businesses with great traction and good product market fit, right? And good founding teams that know how to sell their product, right? But they also want to see fundamentally sound businesses that are generating cash flow, right?
Yeah.
And particularly, a lot of those, they want to start, they want to look at dividend plays, not just 3 to 5 year investment cycles. And I'm seeing those investment cycles stretch out now. Now their plays are saying 7 to 10 years, right? But we want a dividend play. We want to be able to take every 12 months, some cash off the table, right? So the market's changing. Whether it comes back around to and we've been through a couple of those cycles, because it was early 2000s. There was that cycle of just throw money at it, right? And then things tightened up, and then we got loose again, right? And then they tightened back up, which is happening now. We'll see what happens here in the next 5 or 6 years, or decade or so, if everybody gets high on the hog again and starts throwing cash, pretty frivolously. But it's been interesting to kind of sit back and watch and see what's happening. Just my My open advice to founders right now is you mentioned it. Your fundraising cycles are going to be a lot longer than traditional. You need more runway. You don't need 12 to 18 months of runway anymore. You need 24 to 36 months of runway, which means you got to raise more capital, and that's tricky because then you dilute more. And can you be judicious and careful with that capital for that runway? That's another mark you got to look for in a good founding team. But you got to be realistic about if all I have is a good idea, and I don't have a lot of traction and a lot of growth, a lot of promising growth that is manifesting my product market fit, you're going to struggle right now, to raise capital. And so, we're seeing, of course, a lot of venture-backed companies laying off a lot of people because they know their next round's a lot further out. And their LPs, their angels are starting to say, "Hey, man, like, we got to get the fundamentals of this business in order, right? We can't continue to burn 10x in cash what we're making in revenue every year. We got to start, we got to start actually, we got to start having some cash flow in the business." And so it's an interesting time in the market at the moment, from what I'm seeing. But it's a time when those who are crafty can do really, really well, right? And they'll build really great businesses, right? So anything you want to add to that before we kind of move on to some of the
I would say, I think that's what's interesting is because of the way things are, there's some really unique funding strategies now, right? You're seeing more of these like revenue-based lending models pop up, which I'm a huge fan of. But I think what you talked about fundamentals, right? And I think that's what entrepreneurs struggle with. And I think that's why the pitch deck does so well, the book, right? Because it's about fundamentals of a business, right? It's just presenting the fundamentals in a way someone can understand, right? And I think that goes back to fundamental business, right? Are you making more money than you're spending? And if you're not, when will you, right? And then what's the strategy to make that happen, right? These are very simple questions, but in order to convince somebody that we kind of know what we do, we overcomplicate the system. It's like, I'm an operations guy. Like, I want it to be as simple and repeatable as possible. And I think that those fundamentals get lost in, are you on every podcast? Are you on TikTok? Like, are you doing all these crazy things versus, okay, what's working? What's not working? Let's dial in our message and let's go find that customer that we know will buy us, And I think that goes down to investors too, right? Investors are everywhere. But if you don't know how to communicate to them, right? Just like you don't know how to and what we've seen, you've probably seen this too. If you can communicate a really strong pitch deck, the odds of you being able to communicate to your customer correlate pretty well. And so if someone does a bad pitch when they're raising capital, it's probably because they don't know what they're doing on the back end. Not always, but there are some times where that's a true statement. And then on the flip side, I know some great entrepreneurs. This is actually why I wrote the book, that know their customer inside and out, are killing it, right? They just don't know how to communicate to an investor. And in my opinion, that should never not be a fundable incident, right? Just because you didn't know how to put together a pitch deck properly, that's just a sad day.
Yeah. Well, and your resource, your book that you've created is so easy to follow, and it's short. It's
like an hour.
yeah, exactly. It's not like you got to spend a ton of time on it, but it lays out the exact framework, in really simple instructions of how to, what slides you should have, how you should articulate those slides, right? What content should be on those slides. It's really easy. It's quite formulaic. So, if you are a founder who's trying to raise, your best friend is going to be the pitch deck book. Go get it off of Amazon. What it's $20, right? $20,
$30. Yeah. Audible, it's $7. Like, it's basically free.
$7 on Audible. There you go. Yeah, maybe the best $20 you ever spent. It may land you, 20 million. Who knows? But yeah,
Seems like a pretty good investment.
yeah, I'd have to agree, man. So let's talk a little bit about some of the biggest mistakes that you do see. You've sat in hundreds of pitches at this point, right?
Yeah.
Both you've given and pitches that you've sat in, right? What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see happen?
I would say the biggest mistake people do is they don't communicate the problem well enough. They don't communicate. Well, I'm going to add to that. One, they didn't connect themselves to the problem. And I'll tell you how easy this is. Like, hi, I'm Tim. I've been in this industry for 5 years. Here are the 3 problems that I noticed, or here's the 3 issues that I noticed, or here's the ways I became aware of these problems. And it's such an easy way it's like an empathic statement. Like, I have this problem because I saw it, right? And then what you've done there is you've just kind of set the ground rules of what's happening now. Like, what are you trying to solve in the world? That's the question. Or what's the problem that's happening? Now I'm connected to it. And if you can start that way, and what people do, and I love this in some ways, is we're very socially aware now. ESG practices is we want to help the world with our business and use it as a force for good, like Cotopaxi and all the other companies that are
all that stuff.
B corporations. And that's great, except for the fact that you're not solving a problem for a customer by helping someone find food. They're unrelatable things. And I know it's a mission for the company, but it's not part of the problem statement. And if we could remove those 2 things from just the beginning, you can bring it in later. But I think if you could start there with just really defining the problem. And I'll give you an example. So I built this gaming company. The deck's in the book. It's awful. But we were like trying to say how we were going to get games to help with compliance in hospitals, and we were going to sell by bed and whatnot. Like, it was so confusing on who the actual buyer was that it made sense that nobody funded us. When we should have said, no, we're going to build a really cool gaming company, and we're going to target those who have video games and health apps on their phones. And there are 90 billion of those, right? Like, that's just who we're marketing to. We're going to build cool games that bridge these 2 things. If you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. Don't care, but that's who we're building it for, right? And I think if we would have taken an approach like that, the conversation would have gone very different versus trying to convince somebody like a hospital would buy video games. Like, it just didn't make any sense. But at the time, it's all we knew, right? Like, but people do this all the time. Like, it's not like an isolated incident that Tim is terrible. Like, I would say, and you might see this too, I'd say 80%, if not more, 85, just don't define the problem well. And because that happens, they can't communicate the solution, right? They can't communicate the revenue problem. They can't communicate the market. And you can't really communicate your team, because how is the team solving this problem if no one really knows what the problem is, right? Like, so if you fail basically on the first slide, you've just told me that you're not worth investing in. It's the beginning one. So I would say that's the biggest problem that I see. And then the other ones are more technical things, more like we see people who leave the ask off, right? And this is my plug. End with your ask slide. Don't do a thank you slide. That is a little tip. And the reason for that is, if you've ever watched any kind of pitch, your ask slide tends to get the most airtime, right? And so if you go to a thank you slide, there's no questions that can be asked about thank you. It's like, thanks, Earl. And then you're like, what did we talk about? Mm-hmm. And so if you leave it on a thank you slide, on the ask slide, it usually has like, this is what we do. This is how much money we're seeking. Here's our milestones. It starts letting me as the investor being like, oh yeah, that was really interesting. Let me start asking questions, because I'm getting kind of prompted, That's more of a tip than a set. But I'd say people leave off the revenue model slide. They just leave out random competition slides. They kind of leave out the basic, 10 to 12 slides that every deck should have. And then they don't start with a very clear problem.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and first impressions, right? So, the first 30 seconds you spend on that first slide defining the problem, if you don't articulate that well and it doesn't resonate, you're probably done, right? Even if your pitch is 10 minutes long, 15 minutes long, if it's 5 minutes, whatever it is, right? You're pretty much done at that point. Something to be said for knowing your audience too, right? Granted, there are investors who invest in things that they don't necessarily have experience with or don't, understand. They like the idea, they like the founding team, the fundamentals look right? But the more you can get in a room with the right people. So if you're trying to solve a problem in an industry, and I know this is a cool thing that you guys do, or when you were at Park City Angels, right? If you're trying to solve a problem in a specific industry, if you can get in a room with people who have been in that industry before, right? That are investing in that industry, who understand, so that when you articulate the problem and a solution to that problem, it makes a lot of sense to them. They go, oh yeah, okay, well, all right, I get this, right? And I'm willing to throw money at it. I've liked that with with Park City Angels model, particularly with kind of the champions, where they choose industry subject matter experts that will align with a founder who's looking to get capital, right, and help them refine and get their their pitch ready to present to the entire Angels group. Dan Caffey, our friend, thank you for tuning in with us today, and thanks for the nice comments. He says, such a great interview, guys. So we appreciate having you on. Dan's done his own fair share of startups and investment, doing both simultaneously right now. Definitely a good guy to follow and know. Dan, are we due for breakfast tomorrow morning? I think maybe. Let's see. So Tim, let's talk a little bit about, look, as founders, we have strengths, we have weaknesses, right? It's just reality. You've been really good at, helping people recognize and coach them on turning weaknesses into strengths. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the things is, like I mentioned, I didn't know a strength of mine was operations, right? It's just something I was naturally good at, is making things really, really easy to do, right? What I learned through this process, and I told you, I sucked. I'll be the first to admit that I was probably the worst at capital raising because I didn't know what the process was. But having gone through it so many times, now I know what the process is, right? And I could take that process, apply it back to something that I was terrible at. And now if I were to raise capital, I'm not saying I'd be 100% successful if I didn't know anybody. Let's just level playing field. But I feel like the way that I would communicate would at least get me to the next meeting with more people, right? So let's raising capital is all about getting to the next meeting. It's not about, if I pitched Earl, you're not writing me a check today on anything that I would pitch, right? You'd be like, cool, interesting, let's chat tomorrow, right? Like that's really what's happening, is you're trying to pitch to get to the next meeting. So I believe what I learned was I could use that strength of mine, which is process, and then I could apply that different places, right? So marketing, right? Marketing is really about processes. Sales is about processes, right? But some people like that I would hire are way better at communicating than I am, right? I used to work with a guy, his name is Mike Horn, probably one of the best communicators that I know, especially from the sales side, right? Learning from him on the way that he communicates, I can turn that into a process, right? And I can teach him the process of doing whatever he's doing, right? And I think that's one of those things that entrepreneurs have. And I think I saw a post you did the other day on LinkedIn that was like, I keep learning areas where I need to learn more, right? Learn more about myself or dive deeper into this area of the business. I don't need to be great at those things, but I need to be able to recognize where my weaknesses are, because you've got this strength that you have. Like I love, connecting with you, and you're a connector of people, and you can bring people into a room to help you solve a problem, right? That you personally have. And now that could become a strength, right? And I think people don't lean on their strengths enough to solve their weaknesses, because they're just like, oh, nope, I'm not good at that thing. I'm going to keep pushing it down the hill versus, and I think leaders do this. I think leaders recognize where their weaknesses are, and they unintentionally grab something where they're really good at to learn the things that they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Founder's ego at times doesn't let you admit that you're not good at something, right? Like,
No, of course I can sell it. Well, how many people do you call?
I can do anything. I can do it all. I can, I can come up with the idea and the vision for the product. I can write the product. I can manage it. I can sell it. I can do the ops. I can do the bookkeeping. I'm the CTO, like the whole thing, right? And I was a solopreneur for a long time. So, at some point in your journey, sometimes literally you wear all the hats, right? Depending on where you're starting and if you're bootstrapping. But this is why, having a founding team. And that's another thing I think the founders should know out there. If you're looking for investment, your chances of getting investment without a founding team are extremely slim. Yeah, if you don't have a good team that complements each other, that can solve problems together, you don't have a CEO type, a CRO type, a COO type, and one of those might be the CFO, kind of type, and with, the CTO or whatever, right? But you need 3, 4, 5 people on that founding team, that have good strengths in fundamental startup, capabilities, right? And if investors don't see that, they're pretty unlikely to be interested.
Well, let's add to that. Let's add why, right?
Yeah.
If you can't convince somebody that your idea is worth taking a huge risk on, why would I do that with my money, right? Like if you can't convince your best friend to leave their job and come hang out with you for 50 hours, 60 hours a week, right? Like, why would I give you my money? Like, solve that first, and your best friend, especially like, when you're later in life, we know people who are CMOs, and we could pull people from different companies. And if it's not strong enough, then, maybe it's not worth it. I don't know. Not saying that's true, but there is something to say about why.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's exactly why an investor is going to look at it that way.
Yep.
I know you've been on this journey of kind of going from entrepreneurship, to kind of entrepreneurship ecosystem, and then more into the corporate world. And this can be kind of a challenging sort of transition one way or the other, right? Going corporate to startup, or startup to corporate world. Tell us a little bit about that journey, what you've learned, what you think that's valuable for people who are ready to maybe get off the off the wheel of startup, right, and want to go do something different.
Yeah. So I will say, being in the startup world is incredibly energizing, right? There's nothing like it. You wear every hat, right? And it's as fun as it sucks at the same time, right? But as I mentioned before, understanding your strengths and understanding your weaknesses. For me, I'd worked with small teams for my entire career, right? The Marine Corps, it was a team of about 20. I know I was part of a larger organization, but our team was really small. And then I went out on my own. It was a team of 5 and team of 2 and a team of 3, like these small teams. And then when I went and worked at the mill, it was just me and, really one other person managing a whole office space. And so I got the chance to work with a really, really good friend of mine, Rick Hernandez at Social Good Software. And, again, operations guy, put some operations in place, and he got his team to about 12 or 15 people now, right? He's in every major museum and zoo that's out there. Just a great entrepreneur. But I was like, how do you go from 15 people to 50, right? Or 50 to 100, or 100 to 1,000? Like, the operations that take place from a startup to a big corporation are very similar, but very different as far as the tools that they use, the way that they communicate to each other. And during that process, this was a long time ago, but I was interviewing at different organizations, and they'd say something, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And even though I'd grown companies to, millions of dollars, right? I was like, how do I not know whatever that is, right? That's actually why I went and got my MBA. Like, Robert Bell was saying all these words and I didn't know what they meant. And so I was like, I got to go get an MBA. And the same thing started to happen over and over again when I started talking to bigger corporations. I mean, SOC 2, we hired you guys, right? So I was like, I don't even know what that is. But there was, and I kept running into this kind of, I would say, knowledge gap that if I wanted to, even if I was working at a startup company and it started to grow, I would have hit a personal cap. And so I was like, how do I get that experience? And I think that that's a thing that a lot of us do, is like we talked about earlier, is like, I just want to keep learning. I'm a learner. I love learning. And so I got a great opportunity to join PointB, who works at some of the largest companies, Microsoft, Toyota, and we're solving big problems for these large organizations. And ESG, huge problem right now, with these companies that are being required to do this type of reporting, a big initiative for you guys, I think, as well. Like there's things out there that the world needs help with. And, I wanted to work with extremely smart people. Every entrepreneur that I've worked with has been that caliber. And I was like, how do I get a bunch of those people in the room and solve one thing versus, they're kind of these individual pockets. And so I got lucky, I will say, because it's not an easy transition. So I did what I knew. I know how to do like online marketing at a very basic level. I seeked out companies that had positions that I could, kind of go in and learn from. And I took a very junior role because I knew that I wasn't going to come in at some director senior level. And so then when I met with people, I met someone who gave me just their time, which I did not expect. I cold reached out to him and said, hey, how'd you get a job here? And fortunately, he really walked me through that whole process, and it ended up working out. But I think that we don't realize that the skill set of entrepreneur can translate into a corporate environment when we're given the chance, right? Like, I mean, there's just so many tools that I know how to use that are all bootstrapped, all small tools that a big organization will never use, even though they're much better than their tools that they're actively using because they're locked into contracts or whatever the issue is, right? But with that being said, it's like, now that I've seen the tool set that you're using, like, let me show you something that could speed up our entire process by 5 people. And so that was my journey. And I think that it was really risky because I loved working with Rick. I loved everything about that, but like I needed to grow. And so that's challenging.
Yeah. That's there's so much there, Tim, particularly for me, as being a founder, your greatest obstacle, right? Your greatest bottleneck is you as an individual, your own knowledge, your own skill, your own mindset, your beliefs, your actions, your behaviors, your habits, right? And how that all translates, and then your willingness to level up, right? And to put in the work to level up. In fact, one of our core values at Nexus IT is a growth mindset, and particularly because you don't continue to evolve and grow an organization unless you lean into learning, right? Unless you lean into growth, unless you say, I'm okay being uncomfortable. I'm okay being out of my depth. And I want to learn new things, right? And continually take on new skills and new knowledge and all that kind of stuff. So, kudos, right, for recognizing the need. Kudos for always leaning into it. It is a place where I see a lot of founders struggle, and it's kind of the reason why you have those 0 to 10 employee founders that that's what they do. They just churn that, right? You have the 0 to 10 million founders, right? You have the founders who take over at 10 million and build it to 50 or 100 million, right? And then they step aside, right? And I'm not saying I'm the guy that can take a business to to 10 billion, right? I've stepped through a lot of the hoops, a lot of those kind of ceilings, but it absolutely has been a journey of working on myself and leveling myself up, and then helping my team to level up as well, right? And that's, look, there are people out there who are comfortable with the cycle they're on. That's okay. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. There are those who know I'm a 0 to 10 million founder, and that's what I'm going to do every 3 years, right? I'm going to go new idea. I'm going to go raise some capital. I'm going to go build something cool. I'm going to grow it to 10 million in revenue, and I'm out. And that's cool, right? And there are those who decide they want to continue to evolve and change and grow and learn newer and bigger things, right? So that's cool, man. And absolutely, leaning on others, to help in that process. There's so much that that an entrepreneur can do in as an entrepreneur, right? In larger organizations as well, right? There's so much that you can learn, so much scrappiness, right? So much grit and stick-to-itiveness, and being crafty and all that kind of stuff that often doesn't exist in corporate environments that are just kind of bogged down with bureaucratic red tape and silos and all that kind of stuff, right? So
Totally.
there's a lot you can do, which is cool. So Tim, we're winding down to the end of the hour here. We got a couple more minutes. This has been a lot of fun. It's been a fascinating conversation. I do want to thank you for joining me, but before we sign off here in a couple of minutes, what are your parting words? What final advice or words would you like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would say seek help, like reach out. I'm not the best at it. I don't think I really internalize things, but if it's the pitch itself, please reach out. I mean, there are resources out there. There's lots of people who are willing to help. Obviously check out the book. I think it's great. Actually, I really do think it's good. Like not even just, it's just a good resource. But I think reaching out for help in any aspect, whether that's to learn something, we're really in a kind of like an emotional state world right now. Like if you need help, I will help. Like please reach out. I think that's a thing. Earl, I've seen you post that as well. Like let's be healthy, let's be happy. And I think that take a step back and see where you're at and work on those strengths and weaknesses. And hopefully you can learn more about your strengths and, turn those weaknesses into like, okay, you know what I'm saying? But I would say, please reach out if you need help with anything. I think that's one of the things that I've loved about Earl and the community that we've built is everyone's really open and willing to be there for people. So
yeah, that's cool. So to that end, for founders that are trying to figure out how to build a pitch deck or how to refine it, if they're pitching over and over again and not landing investment, go sign up to do pitchus.io.
Yeah, free.
We have an application. It's free. You get free advice, from Tim, from Jeff, a couple of cool guys, and they always bring on a cool investor or two to give you some feedback. Where do people go to do that, Tim?
Yeah, just pitchus.io. There's a big button that says apply, I think. If not, then I'll use Bubble to fix it. So it's all coded in Bubble. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Cool beans. Well, Tim, I appreciate you again. We miss you here in Utah. Look forward to when you come back for a visit. But we're glad you're having fun and that you're out there learning and doing cool new stuff, in New York. Thanks again for being my guest, for taking the time. It's been a fantastic segment. A lot of really great nuggets to take away for myself and for the audience. So thanks again for being a friend and for taking the time.
Awesome. Thank you, Earl. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks to our audience so much for joining us on TechBeat here. Again, keep an eye out for some of the segments we have coming up. We got a lot of really cool guests coming up in the coming months. We appreciate you all joining us here this afternoon. Tim and I took myself out there too quick. We're going to sign off. All right, we'll see you.